Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Peter, your WebEx producer, and I will be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you experience technical difficulties, please send a message to the WebEx producer using the Q&A panel. You may also dial 1-866-779-3239 and receive technical support assistance. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode, and as a reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Please keep the drop-down as all panelists. I would now like to introduce your speaker for today, Mike Skinner, Vice President, CLX Technologies. Mike, you now have the floor.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon if you're tuning in from Europe. Thanks for joining us for this session on getting the best from your TMS. Really appreciate the fact that all of you have very busy schedules, so hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some nuggets for how to improve your utilization, effectiveness, and ROI from your TMS solution. And for those of you who don't know, you should if you're on this call, but TMS stands for Transportation Management System. So off we go. Today we're going to be the two of us will be talking. So this is a younger pre-COVID beard version of myself on the left there, and then the ever youthful Dale McClung also joining for part of the conversation to talk about some of the analytics capabilities that will help shippers drive improvements in their TMS. Dale is our Senior Director of Consulting Services and Integrated Logistics Design.
Hello.
Hey there, Dale. Okay, and with that, let's get going. So it's been interesting. We've been doing this for a long time. I've been at this for about 20 years. CLX has been in the TMS market for just under that. So we've done a lot of deployments of TMS in the chemical industry specifically, and a few other industries, working alongside with our partners at Blue Jay Solutions, who is our technology partner, and we are their go-to-market partner in the chemical industry. And so we've done a lot of these in the chemical space. We've done 55 or 60 of these implementations. And so what we're bringing today is some of our experience in doing that, what we're seeing in the market, what we're seeing as best practices with the shippers that we're working with. And what we tend to see with TMS is that TMS solutions, the reason they're so popular and the reason most shippers are implementing them is that they do provide very quick ROI. And that ROI typically starts to accrue in the first few months after go live. And most often we see that TMS solutions pay for themselves within that first 12 months of a project. However, we do find that companies routinely underutilize the full potential of their TMS. Some are much better than others. We've got market leaders that are really hitting it hard and getting absolutely full value from their TMS, but they're really among the few. And the larger majority of our customers and what we're seeing in the market do tend to have opportunities to really expand the capabilities in that ROI. So that true gold, if you will, of a TMS really is available to shippers who are doing the following things effectively. One, just that core functionality of your TMS and making sure that you're utilizing that full range of capabilities that are available within the functionality of a TMS. Two, shippers that are really taking advantage of that very large and rich set of data that's captured on a load-by-load basis and over time to really understand, identify, and then act on opportunities for improvement. So it's that data mining and analytics. And then third, customers that really are tapping into that extended ecosystem that surrounds the TMS, especially with cloud-based solutions in the market, with market-leading solutions. TMS capabilities really go beyond the core functionality that's built within the four walls of the TMS solution by pulling into the network and into that ecosystem additional service providers, additional technology providers that really are growing up in the industry and are tying into TMS solutions. And so what we're seeing again is customers really leveraging all three of those aspects of their TMS. So the goal of this session really is just to spark some thought. We're going to be running at a pretty high level, covering a lot of area at a relatively surface level, really trying to spark some ideas and thoughts for you who are using TMS solutions, and maybe trigger some opportunities for further evaluation. So first in that is, are you using the full range of capabilities available just within your TMS? So several things to think about here. First of all, the answer to that question for most shippers is no, right? I mean, to use 100% of the functionality of a TMS is unrealistic, right? There are a lot of capabilities that are built for specific needs of specific shippers. But most shippers, typically we see are utilizing the system, 45 to 60% of the capabilities of the solution. So for a lot of shippers, we're really just halfway there, especially after that first implementation. And so what we really recommend and strongly we see happening with our best-in-class customers is that first implementation really is just the beginning of the journey with TMS. And so, if that's where you are, and if you haven't really taken those next steps, we're going to just identify some encores for you, the opportunities to go beyond that initial ROI and take advantage. And we've kind of broken that down into a couple of buckets. First one is automation and optimization. So we're really just utilizing the basic functionality of the TMS to do its job. Second one is around carrier strategy and execution. And the topic there being that TMS really should be a platform for you to effectively manage your carrier strategy. Third one is, are you expanding beyond your initial scope, right? A lot of shippers sort of implement and stop. Other shippers really take a broader view and go beyond those initial modes and regions. And then finally, freight financials. A lot of companies don't implement financials to start off with, and we'll talk about some of the benefits of doing so. Okay, so with that, jumping in here to automation. What we do see is that the large majority of transportation planning, execution, invoice processing, that whole process around transportation, a large majority is automatable in a TMS. 80 to 95% of those transportation activities. On the 80 side, you might have a lot of complex loads or complex scenarios or a lot of exceptions, last-minute exceptions and so forth. But then, your more standard freight should be up around 95% automated. But it really takes effective change management to get there. As we've always said in technology implementations, it's not just about the technology, it's about the people and the processes as well. And so to get full advantage of your TMS, you really need to have that effective change management. Some companies have organizations within the company to drive change management. A lot of shippers don't. And so I just wanted to focus on a few things here to think about. First one, you clearly kind of a no-brainer is user adoption. And what we tend to see is that users, of course, are categorized or kind of fall into a couple of different buckets. We've got your leaders in the space where you've got individuals in your organization who are just looking for opportunities to improve, love technology, or looking to ways to leverage the technology. You've got on the other end of the scale your laggards, your folks who really like to do it the way they used to do it and they've always been doing it, might like to talk to carriers, might like to really just get into their email and do stuff. And of course, you've got users that are in between. And even internally here at CLX, we have the same thing, right? So we not only implement TMS technology, but we are a 4PL, 3PL. So we're using this kind of technology on a day-to-day basis. And so we have this ongoing program, we call it the perfect order. And the intent there really is to measure, report, train, and repeat, right? So we're looking for opportunities where we're not fully automated. Where are we doing a lot of manual work? There's reporting available in the TMS that shows that. Some of it's only observable by watching. But you've got to be able to capture that and set your goals and your metrics, and then identify opportunities to do some retraining of your folks and making sure that they're following through and then continuing to monitor that. Again, working towards that perfect order, no touch concept. All of that takes a capable and empowered super user. Absolutely key there. You've got to have somebody in the organization who's a champion for the TMS solution, who understands how to use it and get the most out of it. If you don't have an empowered and capable super user, you got to get one. The other aspect of that, bullet number 3, there's the value stream mapping, right? So the TMS does not exist independently of other processes, and so it is often very important to look at the entire process from order management, customer management, what's happening in your ERP, how is your master data in your ERP, and all of those features or all of those activities and processes that happen around the TMS that might be impacting your ability to fully automate. So we do recommend taking a good solid look at that. The fourth recommendation here is really to concentrate that load planning into centers of excellence. And in some cases that means, and we've got several customers that have done this, to fully centralize that load planning function. So they've got a control center, command center at a central staff location where they're really utilizing the system just in a very concentrated way to get the most out of the solution. But we're also seeing shippers that are taking a different approach to really just kind of concentrate that activity into a smaller number of your leaders and so forth. And then the last point is just around automation. Some of your loads are more complex. Some of your opportunities for things like load consolidation and order consolidation really are best left to the optimizer. So another opportunity for automating and optimizing your activities there. Next area is around carrier strategy and execution, and I put the partnership logo up there, or emblem on the upper right here, because in addition to using your TMS to leverage your carrier base and your carrier relationships and so forth, you also really want to use the TMS to be a better partner with your carriers. And so there are a few things to think about in all of that. So for sure, your TMS through reporting and your metrics is going to identify areas where you've got strong and weak performers with carriers. Some are just better than others, right? But it's also going to highlight where you've got carriers that have preferred and non-preferred lanes. So just because a carrier is not performing in certain areas doesn't mean they're a bad carrier. It might mean that they just aren't well suited for that lane. And the results of the bid, they were the low cost. However, they're not the ideal carrier on that lane. So again, it's that kind of push and pull with your carriers in terms of where that capability is. And so a lot of that's going to identify opportunities to take into your procurement strategy that history with your carriers to better negotiate with your carriers, and also to think a little bit more about how you're awarding freight and how you're creating your initial routing guides in order to drive that strategy. And so there are several things here, and this is quite a lot to absorb, and we'll try to keep it at a high level here, but things to think about are that your routing guide should not be static. It should be dynamic. You don't want to set it and forget it, right? You might set it initially based on the results of your procurement event, your most recent procurement event, but you don't want to be doing things like going through your 1, 2, 3, 4 carrier to get to your number 5 carrier. If your number 5 carrier is always taking the freight, none of your other 4 are, it's time to think about rejiggering your routing guides to make sure that you're keeping your process efficient and using the carriers that you want to. It will also help to highlight, where you're using a number 1 carrier, but they're expensive. So there are reports in your TMS that are going to help you identify where you're overspending in certain situations. Another areas to think about is taking your loads to market, using the spot bidding and broadcast tendering capabilities of your TMS. For sure, these tools are good for getting loads covered in a pinch, getting loads covered that you don't have a rate for, but they also can really be good tools to help identify sort of changes and shifts in lane capacity and pricing in order to really understand what's happening today in the market. And one of the tools that you should be able to use to help with that is taking advantage of digital freight brokers. So most market-leading TMSs should have an integrated solution with your digital freight brokers like Uber Freight, LoadSmart, Convoy, and so forth. And those guys are going to be able to give you real-time market pricing. So again, just a good way to gauge the market and see where you are. Next one is around dedicated and private fleet. So TMS has all the data and information that'll help enable you to identify, troubled lanes, right? Where you have trouble covering loads, where you've got a lot of volume, but you don't have a lot of compliance with carriers, or you might have an opportunity to reduce costs if you're dedicating capacity. And there's some really strong tools within a TMS or a strong TMS that should allow you to manage a dedicated fleet scenario or a private fleet scenario in conjunction with your common carriers or your contracted lane by lane carriers to really get full advantage of those two approaches to managing your carriers. And then lastly, kind of both around internal efficiencies, but also around being a better partner to your carriers is dock scheduling, slot booking, and yard management, right? Those are tools within a good TMS that are going to help you to be more efficient and effective in moving freight in and out of your facilities, but also are going to give you better throughput for your carriers. So getting drivers through your facility more quickly absolutely will make you a better shipper to your carriers and should help you to get better compliance from your carriers. So again, using that TMS to implement a strategy, assess your strategy, and revise your strategy with your carrier base on an ongoing basis. Next up, expanding beyond your first implementation, right? So some shippers, and we've got a number of shippers that go global to start with. They go global, all modes, jump in and do the whole thing. I would say the majority of shippers, though, do start in a region, and more often than not start with outbound road freight. And it really should just be the beginning because most market-leading TMSs are very good at handling ocean freight, rail freight, parcel and air freight, and really should be considered as possibilities for automating and improving there. And the other thing in terms of expanding globally, especially if we're a North American-centric manufacturer, or that's where you started, one of the things that we're doing more and more is helping customers assess opportunities in other markets and bringing individuals, the user community from other markets, say EMEA or APAC or Latin America, into a bit of a fit gap assessment to really get them engaged and invested in that process of understanding what they're trying to do and then buying in to the solution. So it's one of the services that we're doing more and more with our customers, really to help expand internationally. And then around inbound freight, just briefly on that, there is a ton of opportunity in inbound freight. It's not an easy one to tackle, but your TMS should have the capability of pulling your vendors into that in management of your inbound freight process, whether it be through a vendor portal or through integrations electronically with your vendors, really to get full control over your inbound freight, picking the right carriers, right modes, right rates. And we're seeing huge savings opportunities being driven by customers taking control in their TMS of their inbound freight. So look to expand beyond your initial modes and regions and really get a full advantage there. And then the last one, in terms of just using the core functionality of the TMS, we're continually surprised at how many shippers delay the implementation of using TMS to handle the freight bill audit and payment. And there are a couple of key drivers here for why this is really important. First of all, most shippers that do delay that do so because they've already got an outsourced or 3PL freight pay service. And the counterintuitive thing that we've been seeing with shippers is that when they insource freight pay into TMS, usually there's actually no increase, and oftentimes there's a decrease in the internal labor effort to manage the freight pay process, even when using a third party. And the reason is that TMS is very efficient and effective at automating a lot of that and then enabling your users to resolve exceptions. It also gives you much tighter controls over your planned and unplanned charges, to the extent that we see a lot of shippers are fully funding all of their TMS costs by taking the freight pay into the TMS and really tightening down the screws on that. And then lastly, on this lower right there, this self-billing, automated self-billing, and EDI invoicing can significantly help speed up payment to carriers. Again, back to the carrier partnering. The faster you pay your carriers, the happier they are going to be taking your loads. And so that full process of integrating the freight financials into the TMS is really key. Now, a lot of that opportunity takes some serious analytics and assessment and skill sets to really identify opportunities and also to drive those changes. And so Dale McClung's going to be coming in here and talking about how we look at analytics with TMS data, and hopefully give you some nuggets to think about with regard to driving those improvements. So Dale.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. Over the next few minutes, we'll be talking about the role of analytics in the TMS environment. And if you're new to TMS and just installing it, you may have found yourself put into a data-rich environment. And before we really get into the mining here, I want to articulate the difference between reporting and analytics. So reporting is the foundational step of getting data together in a way that you can use it and manipulate it to begin the process of analytics. And from the analytics, continuous improvement is usually born. And from continuous improvement, changes and improvements in the process and costs and efficiency are the key drivers for a business case in support of the business case for TMS. So over the next few minutes, we'll look at data mining best practices, some common continuous improvement areas, and how to make those improvements. And finally, we'll end it with some examples of analytics from what my team and I help other clients in this area. So in terms of data mining best practices, data sets tend to have a lot of capabilities and a lot of scope. It's good when you look at a data set to understand the capability of a data set and a scope. Most of the time, the data out of the TMS environment is constructed for a particular broad audience. And you really need to understand the limitations of the data that you're looking for. And cleansing and validating is such a crucial step, because understanding the type of data that you're seeing there, whether, for example, it's rated spend or actual spend, or planned pickup and delivery dates or actual pickup and delivery date, is key in interpretation and driving that continuous improvement. And understand where the data comes from. So the meaning of columns in data sets is so important. That planned pickup time, well, is that the actual planned or the first planned? And the actual pickup time, where does that data really come from? Does it come from an output from your ERP, or does it come from a signal from the carrier that they've left the facility or arrived at the facility? So understanding that where the data comes from is also really important. And finally, avoid mining data blindly. We see this so often, that people are in a data-rich environment and they start mining the data without a burning question to answer, or without a platform. And really, you can burn up a lot of time in just mining data, hoping to find that needle in the haystack. So those are some data mining best practices. Let's move on to some common improvement areas. So one of the most common improvement areas for you to start out on are in the topics of spend, on-time performance, and tender performance. So This is a time where targets are a really important aspect of the analytics process. You know, when we look at spend, we're looking at how much to expected spend are you at, and what areas are not or higher or lower in deviation, and which needles can you move? You know, some spend is a function of the business process. It's a specialty product and it has to have a high on-time performance, and the spend is it's more expensive to move that cargo. Other examples, commodity product where spend on transportation and on-time performance is really key and can hurt your margins if it's not under control. And finally, tender performance. So how well is the tender process that Mike talked to you about earlier? How well is it performing in terms of what you expected to happen versus actual? And this is a really important continuous improvement area that shouldn't be ignored, because it's a process that happens automatically with TMS, and it needs to be monitored for efficiency and optimal design. Otherwise, you could have some tender processes out there that are costing you a lot more than what you expected. So those are the three common improvement areas I wanted to mention. Now let's move on to how to make those improvements. Now, so I included at the bottom here the DMAIC cycle and the ADCAR for change management that is so important in this prospect. Making improvements is a little bit more difficult than doing the analytics, right? Now you're keeping the improvements in line and making them real. And it's best to start out simple. And what do I mean by simple? Some examples of simple when you're just starting in the continuous improvement area is unplanned accessorials. You're having a look at those unplanned accessorials to try to cut costs. How much are you using spot market capacity? Mike mentioned a few slides ago that spot market capacity is good for a pinch, but it could become chronic, and you need to be aware of that and watch out for it. And another example of keeping it simple is looking at opportunities where you're shipping to the same location multiple times per day or maybe multiple times per week, and you can consolidate those down to a single truck or less trucks to reduce your transportation spend. Those are three examples of keeping it simple, which we work with clients pretty often on. And peer review recommendations. Data and analytics is only part of the process. The other part of the process is what's happening in the real world that's not in the data. So having this peer review of continuous improvement ideas not only gets buy-in, but it also gives you that aspect of the element that's not in the data to make sure that this continuous improvement idea that you have is worthy of implementation. And finally, measuring and sharing results is a must-have for sustainability, right? Communicating the results is a good way to not only sustain what you're trying to do, but also set the stage for further and future continuous improvement ideas. When people are warming up to the aspect of change and doing things differently, measuring and sharing those results is an important step in that. Okay. So those are the three things that we use to make improvements. Let's look at now some examples finally of how we help clients in that process. And the first example is in tender performance, right? So clearly identifying how often you use the lowest cost carrier and what your overspend is. And then in the lower left, what lanes do you have tender performance problems? Being able to pinpoint those and the trend of your tender performance. And finally, control charting. We use this a lot with clients in the analytics part, is to be able, with statistical significance, be able to predict and analyze out of control circumstances. So in that lower right corner, you see a control chart, and right below it, you see bubbles, and each bubble here is a carrier, an individual carrier, so that we can start to identify the carriers that are causing the out of control behavior and which ones aren't. That's an example of tender performance. So if we move on to another example, it's on-time delivery. Now, on-time delivery is a really touchy subject in most organizations. Most modes have their own definition of on-time delivery. When we're working with clients, we actually customize the calculations for them by mode, sometimes even by customer, so that we can align with on-time performance definitions within their organization. Usually it's not a 100% match, but getting as close as you can to the organization's definition of on time is really important. But then it's important to put carriers against each other, and that's what's happening in the lower left here. On the x-axis, you just have a shipment count, and on the y-axis, you have the on-time performance. And those crosshairs are the average of both. And this is a great visual if every dot here is a different carrier. So now you can clearly see which carriers are high volume and not performing up to the collective average of the group, which carriers are high volume and exceeding the collective average. And this gives you an idea, a great way to isolate your carrier population to focus in on performance issues. And then the trend and by geography, how you're doing in on-time performance is crucial. Okay, one last example of how we do analytics for clients, and something to consider if you're handling analytics on your own, is on spend performance, right? Clear visibility into transportation spend by mode is very important. And being able to break that down into the various aspects of spend, the line haul, the fuel, the accessorials, how that adds up to the total. And if you want to start benchmarking or asking the question, how am I doing in relation to my peers in the market? That's what that bottom left-hand graph is doing, is saying, you know, as a percent of the total spend, how are my accessorials and fuel trending, right? So that's a great way to compare yourself to the market in how your carriers are doing, right? Another comparison, again, is putting carriers against themselves by lanes, and that's what the right-hand graph is doing. You see the lanes down the left-hand side, and each dot is a carrier. And if you see that orange line in the middle, that's the average. So on the x-axis is the total spend. So you can, or I'm sorry, the cost per ton mile. But now you can start to see which carriers, again, from a spend perspective, are out of line on certain lanes. So it's clear here that you've got 3 and up to 5 carriers on specific lanes which are doing something different than the rest of the group and warrants some kind of further investigation. So those are the kinds of visual analytics that examples that we provide to customers. I hope this helps, and some advice on how to get started and what to look for. So with that, Mike, I think I'll turn that back over to you.
Good, yeah, and you know, I think that one nice thing is that all of this data is available in you know, in any market-leading TMS, and in TMS solutions, typically you're going to have access to a lot of reports and data extracts and so forth. And one of the things that Dale and his team have really done is to kind of elevate the utilization of that data by creating, you know, dashboards and key metrics here to really help highlight opportunities for improvement. And the tools that we're using are Tableau, great tool, but then it really does take that expertise that the analysts can bring to the table to drive this kind of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Just one last topic, if you will. Yes, we talked about the kind of the core functionality within a TMS, and then the analytics you can derive from your TMS. But then beyond that, what we're seeing more and more, and this has really evolved and accelerated in the last couple of years, is the fact that TMS solutions providers have really been identifying new technology developers, new technology solutions and services that they aren't necessarily going to build intrinsically into the TMS, but have created huge opportunities for improvements by integrating with these additional service providers. And then also around the concept that your TMS is an ecosystem even beyond those solutions providers. We'll talk a little bit about that. So first off, tapping into that integrated ecosystem, there are several aspects of this. First, in the top left, when you plug into a TMS, especially a market-leading cloud-based TMS, you're plugging into a community of shippers and carriers and other partners and other players. And so it does create real opportunities then to do some benchmarking. And we provide these services, other companies provide these services to really take a look at the entirety of shippers and carriers in these networks in order to help customers better gauge how your costs against the market, as well as your service against the market, because we're now capturing this very detailed and granular service data, pickup and delivery and tender performance data. We're able to help customers benchmark themselves against other shippers in terms of your carrier base and are you using carriers that are leading in the market. And then lastly, on that side, user conferences are always a great place to go and share experiences, learn from your fellow shippers as well. On the upper right with the carrier networks, obviously when you're plugging into TMS, you're plugging into a large carrier network. You might start off with 50, 75, 100 of your own carriers that are already on the network and you're going to plug into. But very often there are tens of thousands of other carriers in that space already tied into that into that network. And so there are tools in TMS solutions that really help identify, on specific lanes where you are having trouble or where you're paying a lot of money, are there other carriers on those lanes that you might want to take a look at? So there are tools in the TMS that will say, yes, highlight those carriers, highlight the ones that really are moving freight in those lanes to give you an opportunity to expand your network. And then, as I mentioned before, the digital freight brokers, another good opportunity to utilize the TMS to reach out to that external network to really look for additional opportunities. Similarly to the digital freight brokers, TMS solutions these days are more and more are fully integrating with external solutions partners around telematics and tracking. Everybody wants to know where their load is, and especially they want to know if it's going to be late. They don't want, as a shipper, the last thing you want to hear from a customer is, where is my truck? You want to know where it is. You want to be able to proactively alert your customers. And so companies like Project 44, FourKites, MacroPoint have been developing the capabilities to take that GPS data directly from the truck and integrate it into their tracking systems and integrate those systems into the TMS, so that tracking capability, that breadcrumb tracking, is now available and very possible within your TMS solution. And then similarly in terms of modal ecosystems, certainly in certain modes, it's you go beyond sort of that one-to-one relationship with a shipper and a carrier, right? And so, TMS solutions really should be helping you to better leverage those broader ecosystems, like in ocean freight, tying in your freight forwarders, tying in sailing schedules, so you have better visibility and control and execution around your ocean freight. On the rail side, your TMS might help you execute rail shipments within the TMS, booking with the carriers, doing your freight payment, and so forth. But TMSs typically don't do things like asset management, so managing the fleet, optimizing the fleet, maintaining the fleet. But many TMSs are integrated with external solutions providers for those kinds of things. Similarly, on the parcel side, Within your TMS, very often TMS solutions will allow sort of basic parcel management capability. But if you're a high volume parcel shipper, you might want to be integrating your TMS with an external parcel focused TMS to take advantage of that. So again, just a variety of different ways of plugging in other solutions into your TMS and taking fuller value. And the last thing I just want to touch on, a little bit kind of related to this concept of ecosystem, which is managed services. And this really gets to the point that doing a lot of the work to identify and advance opportunities in your TMS takes a lot of skill. So it takes talent and analytical capabilities and so forth. And what we are seeing in the market is that those individuals are hard to find. And so one recent statistic that we grabbed here is that for every job, every opportunity or job opening for supply chain experts and professionals, there are six job openings to one person available. So that market is very tight. And so a lot of shippers just aren't able, whether because they're not able to find them or can't afford to hire them, to bring in that talent in-house. And so one of the things that CLX is doing and other providers are doing really is to augment that internal talent with services. So some of the things that we're doing frequently with customers, providing that added layer of super user support, right? So whether it's helping to manage your user community and or to really just manage the master data, right? So maintaining rates, keeping carriers and rates and integrations updated and so forth. Keeping the system live and active and up to date is key. And if you don't have that internal super user, it might be something to think about in terms of a service. Modal management, right? So in the chemical industry, shippers tend to want to manage and keep control over their bulk freight, for example. But they might not have all that much leverage with LTL carriers or with truckload carriers. So oftentimes there's a nice opportunity to outsource or bring in a third party for a specific mode to really help augment your internal resources. Similarly with procurement, right? So the benchmarking, procurement, the leverage in the market, the knowledge of the market, and almost as importantly, if not more importantly, is the speed to market. So running a procurement event, if you're doing it in-house with folks that are tied up doing 18 other things, getting a procurement event out the door, in the door, optimized and so forth, can be a big lift. Might take you 3 or 4 months. If you bring in support to do that, you might be able to get that done in 2 or 3 months quicker. And every month that you speed up that process by is a month of savings that you're driving from that procurement event. And of course, there's always the opportunity for full 3PL, 4PL outsourcing, always that option. And then the last one is around analytics. The stuff that Dale and his team are doing is not easy. It takes significant expertise. It takes access to that data and the tools to manage and manipulate and use that data to really identify and drive continuous improvement. So you might have some opportunities to really reach out and pull in that expertise on a service base. So that I think gets us to the end there. Yeah. So trying to come in right on time here to make sure we have some time for questions. But hopefully that was helpful. Right. Really just looking to scratch the surface here, get you thinking about ways to improve your utilization and your ROI from your TMS. And so hopefully you've learned a few things or sparked some thoughts, and be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, you may submit written questions using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Please keep the drop down as all panelists. And Mike, I currently am not showing any questions at the moment.
Okay, that means that we put them to sleep or we answered all the questions. So in either case, thank you all for your time. And again, hopefully this was helpful. If you'd like a copy of the deck or to talk more about it, please feel free to reach out to us.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's event. Thank you for attending. You may now disconnect your lines and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.